Hey, what is going on, guys? Max Settings here, and welcome back to another review. And today we are doing probably my most requested review. Today we are going to be reviewing the RME ADI-2 DAC. And this has been my personal DAC for a little over a year now. And I have a lot of experience with it, and a lot of people asked me what I thought about it. Because it is quite the popular DAC right now. It's getting a lot of love online. And I just wanted to give you all my thoughts of this unit, some ways how I think people don't quite understand this unit, and how I think it sounds, and who I think it's for, and if it is worth its price tag. So the first thing we're going to get out of the way is, I guess you can say, specs, but I'm not really going to do many specs. This video is already going to be very long because I'm going to go over the features of this DAC, which there are many. So I'm not going to bore you with, distortion specs and bit rates, whatever. You can look all that stuff up yourself. The only two things I'm going to mention really for specs is the price and the chip used. So this is an $1,100 DAC. When it launched, it was $1,000. I personally paid $950 for this one, brand new, about a little over a year ago now. But they've gone up in price to about $1,100 nowadays. The other thing I want to mention, which is something I see a lot of people get wrong about this. This DAC is using the AKM AK4490 chip. However, it is not a dual mono DAC. There are not two chips in here. A lot of people say this is a dual mono DAC, which it is not. It is only a single AKM AK4490, which is a great example of how DAC chips don't really make much of a difference. It's more of the implementation, because the AKM AK4490 is the same chip that's used in both the Shitfulla 2 and Madi 3. So same chip as in a $99 shit all-in-one DAC amp is used in this $1,100 German-made RME DAC. Okay, so let's go over what you get in the box. So you get the DAC, you get a remote, which we'll go over in a second. You get a manual, which I couldn't find. I need to find it, but the manual is really cool. I've never seen a manual where the engineers explain their thought process for their design choices. And they seem like proud of the choices they made when they were designing this, and they want you to know about it, and they kind of lay it all out in the manual. It's really neat. I've never seen anybody else do that. You also get a USB cable and the power brick, and I believe that's all you get with the RME. So let's start with a little bit of a basic overview of the unit. So the box is metal whole way around. On the front you have the power button, which is red when it's off, white when it's on. You have a 1/4-inch headphone jack out. You have a 3.5mm IEM output, which RME claims is the cleanest amplifier in the world, their IEM output on this amp. You have a digital volume knob with a push-in, which can be used for selection in some of the menus. You have 4 buttons here: volume, input, output, or I/O, EQ, and setup, and I will show what all of those do later. You have the screen with the famous visualizer and VU meters, which I will also show you later on my actual desk. Here we have the bass treble knobs, which also are used for menu selection. These also click in and turn, which I will also show more later. And then let's see, the top is just plain except for a indented RME logo. Both sides are just metal vents. The bottom, you have feet with some foam padding, and you can see they're like just a little bit raised to raise the unit up. On the back, you have your power input. Of note, this input is locking. The plug is actually keyed, and if you can see, there's like there's 2 little cutouts on either side of the plug. So you have to line the key up, push in, and then twist. I actually made this mistake myself. I've seen other people make this mistake where they go to plug it in and they don't realize it's keyed. And then whenever you move the unit, the power plug is loose and it shuts off. I've seen people complain about that, so keep that in mind. USB input, coaxial input, optical input, your XLR balanced outputs, and your RCA unbalanced output. And that is the overview of the exterior of the unit. As for the remote, you have power, obviously turns on and off, volume down, volume up, your 3 inputs, coaxial, optical, and USB. 1, 2, 3, and 4, these are all buttons that you can program to many different functions, which I will again show you later. And mute, which just mutes the unit. So that is the physical overview of the RME. Okay, so now on to what this device was really intended for. So the RME ADI-2 DAC was not really intended for audiophile use. RME products are like legit studio use type stuff. Like they're actual things people use to do serious work. They are not making products or marketing products towards audiophiles and for just people listening to music. This DAC was never really intended for people to, just use with their headphones or with their speakers just to listen to music for pleasure. This was meant for people who want to do serious work, mixing or running an event or something, to have a serious DAC with a lot of features for professional use, which is why this DAC has so many features. And is also why some people would say it's a good value because it doesn't have the quote-unquote audiophile tax because it is marketed towards pro gear. Another device or another DAC that I would say also is in a similar position would be the Sound Devices USB Pre 2. I've seen that thing be getting a lot of praise recently. I would say that's another DAC that kind of falls in the same pro gear that audiophiles now use. So keep that in mind that this thing was not really designed for audiophile usage. It was more designed for pro usage. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to my actual desk and show you an overview of the features. All right, so here we are on my desk, and we're going to go over the features of the ADI-2 real quick. Okay, so first thing is the volume knob, which is just a digital volume knob, and you can see the number changes there all the way from negative infinity to 0, and you can take it past 0, but if you do that it will clip, so I do not recommend taking it past 0. So you have that. And then of course on the screen is the famous visualizer and VU meters. You can see the green there that visualizes your music, and you have the VUs at the bottom, as well as your bit rate and your volume. And then this screen also has a couple of different ones. This one shows your output, your power mode for the headphones, your bass and treble adjustments, which we'll get into in a second, your inputs, your volume, and your clock, or your bit rate, sorry. This one shows the status of all of your inputs and the clock status. So that's a little overview of these 3 menus. These are bass and treble knobs that you can go +6 to -6 dB on the bass and on the treble. And these knobs are also used for the menus, which you will see in a second. And we'll talk a little bit more about those when we go into the menus. Let's see, also on the front, we have the phone out and the IEM out, which we will talk about in a bit if we haven't already talked about it. And then, so let's go over the buttons. So volume is pretty simple. This one just lets you do the volume here for whatever reason if you don't want to do the big volume knob. And balance, which lets you pan left and right. Then we have the I/O button, which is input output. Now on these menus you have a system of I'd call it tabs and pages, where the top one, you see it says 1 and 2. The 1, you can also see there in the corner, corresponds to the one on the top that you switch between, and say like the tabs. and then there are pages within each tab. So here on the line output, you have settings, which you have the source, which is USB optical coaxial, or whatever rec means. And then you have the reference level, which is your output voltage, which goes from -5 to +1, +7, or +13 dBu, but I usually just leave it on +13. This is the auto, which makes that the output voltage automatic, where it picks itself. Mono, if you want to set to mono, which is good for testing purposes. Width, which is kind of just like shrinks the sound stage down until it becomes mono. This is MS processing, which means mono something processing. It sets it to mono, and then it does some other stuff. I'm not 100% sure what that does. Polarity lets you reverse the polarity of the phase. You can reverse the phase of both, or just the left or the right. Crossfeed. This is basically what this does is it feeds a little bit of the sound from like the left driver into the right and vice versa. And there's various amounts of it that you can use, 5 different steps, and you can read in the manual like what all of those do. We'll save some time. Filters, you have SD sharp, SD slow, sharp, slow, and NOS. I'm not going to get into what those do, but I prefer SD sharp. We have de-emphasis. Dual EQ, I believe, lets you set an individual EQ profile per side of the DAC. Volume, which is once again just the volume. The lock volume, this is a cool feature for pro environments. If you're running something where you have the volume set and you don't accidentally want to change it, you can lock it. And then when we come out here, if we go to change the volume, did it lock? Oh, we're on the headphones, that's why. Here, the line out, but if it's locked, you see I can't actually change it because it says volume is locked. So that is nice for professional environments. Balance, we already went over what that does. And then we have mute, which you can mute this. And of note, all these only apply over each output. They are all unique. So if I mute the line, the headphones are not muted, or vice versa, or the IMs aren't muted. And same with every other setting here, only applies to whatever output we are currently on. So for the phones and the headphones and the IMs, they're all the same options, except you don't get the line voltage level, but you do get the high power mode off and on, so you do have that. So that is it for the settings on the headphones, line output, and IM. You also have the parametric EQ, so you can enable it. Then you have the band, where you can pick the type of band, the gain, the frequency, the Q value of, is it 5 bands, I believe? Yeah, 5 different bands. And you can do each one of these, each for the line, the headphones, and the IEMs. And then you have the bass and treble, so that's where these bass and treble knobs come into place. So you can pick the gain, the frequency, the Q value for the bass and the treble, and you can set, these are all unique per each output once again. So the line, the phones, and the IMs, you can set each of these specifically for those. And then you have loudness, which basically this is so you can play music louder, and it raises like the bass and the treble to trick you into thinking it's louder than it actually is. So you can set the gain and the treble and the whatever the low cuts or whatever for that. And I believe that is it for the I/O. Then we have EQ. Now, I don't EQ, so I've actually like never used this. But basically, so this lets you pick your 5 bands. Then I believe you go in here and you do, this one does Q value, this one does frequency, and I think you do one other one that sets something. Oh no, then the volume knob becomes like the gain. Yeah, there it is. So you set your frequency and your Q, and then this one becomes the gain for each band. So there you go. So that is how you do. Oh, and then you can then you click in to switch between bands of the EQ. I just learned that myself. So then you hit EQ again, and then you have the menus, which once again is per each output. So you have enable, then you can set presets, so you can save different EQ presets, which is nice. Once again, for professional environments, or if maybe you have an EQ for your speakers and your headphones and your IMs, you can save different EQ profiles for all those, which is nice. Then we have the setup page. Now in here, there's a lot of stuff that's not the most interesting. And once again, pages and tabs. So the first page we have, or tab we have, is options. And then we have, let's see, start with device mode. Okay, so this lets you set where mute line off means when you plug in the headphones, the line output does not mute. And I believe when you do that, only controls the line. And to control the volume of the headphones, you actually have to go back into that I/O menu and change the headphones there. Mute line versus phones means when you plug in the headphones, the line output mutes. And mute line toggle phone, which is what I usually leave it on, is where the remote has a setting where it switches between the line output and the headphone output. So when I hit 3, it switches from headphones to the line output. So this is nice if you have headphones and speakers. If you don't want to unplug your headphones to listen to speakers, you just hit the button. You can leave your headphones plugged in, your headphones mute, and your speakers play. And now moving back in, DSD direct line, I don't do DSD, so don't care. DSD filter, don't care. DSD detection, don't care. Moving on, clock. You can pick a clock source, which you can only pick internal currently, but if you have other stuff set up to it, you can pick your source, your sample rate, which is on 96K, which is relying on some software. There are software and drivers for this unit. DSD rate, don't care. Then you have hardware and diagnostics, so let's see. Remapping keys, so you can remap the keys in the remote. Okay, so then you have, this is where you set the four buttons for the remote, 1, 2, 3, and 4, where you can set what they do. So I'm going to show you what options you have for all 4 of these. All the same for each key. So you have default, which I don't remember what default is per each key. I'm sure it says in the manual, but anyway, you have setup 1, which is like these are all presets. So there's 9 different presets you can set and set those up to the buttons. There's mono, which sets the unit to mono. Mono to left, which just sets it to mono and only plays on the left side. Mute, which I don't know why you would need that because there's already a mute switch on the remote. Loudness turns on the loudness. EQ enabled turns on your EQ. BT enables or disables the bass and treble switch. So if you want to have like the quick adjustments on and then hit a button to auto switch them off without having to like physically turn each one, you can do that. This one turns on EQ plus bass and treble and then plus the loudness all together. This one's toggle phones in line, which lets you do that thing where you switch between the headphones and the line output. Polarity lets you reverse the phase again. Auto dark sets this to the dark mode, like the auto dark mode where the screen turns off after an activity, which we'll go over in a second. And dim is a 20 dB drop in the audio, or the loudness of the audio. So on my remote, I have 1 is mono, 2 is auto dark, 3 is toggle phones in line, and 4 is dim, but you can do whatever you want. Test results, actually no idea what that does, and software version right there. Then we have display. So there is light mode, which is white menus, and then there's dark mode, which nobody's ever going to use light mode, so you use dark mode. Meter color, you can switch between green and cyan. I know a lot of people like cyan. I much prefer green. But cyan just basically changes the color of the visualizer to cyan over the green. I like the green personally. Auto dark mode, I have a button set up for this on the remote, which I believe is 2. And basically what this does is after a few seconds of inactivity, the screen and the lights around the volume knob and the power button dim off until you adjust the volume or hit a button and they click back on. So that's nice. You can go for like a blacked out look. So I'm going to turn that back off for now. Show volume screen. I actually don't know what that does. I guess it shows the volume screen, whatever that means. This lets you change the brightness of the screen on the device. You can do it from 20 to 100%. I have it on 80. 80 is pretty good. Then you can either cool down or warm up the display. with it was 8 clicks in each direction. So you can change the coolness or warmness of the display. So that is pretty cool. And we are back to that. So next tab, setups. This is where you load in your like presets. You can type out the name and the setups, but I don't use any of those. And is that it? We did options. Yep. So that is it for that. Okay. So that is the extent of the menus on the RME ADI-2 DAC. And then also on the front, you just have your headphone and IEM output. So, obviously pretty simple. You just plug it in like so, and your music will start playing out of your headphones or your line output. And there we go. So we are now playing music, and you have the IEM output for your IEMs. Yeah, so that is pretty much the usage of the RME ADI-2 DAC here on the desk. I guess the one other thing I will show you is the turn on and turn off speed. So if you want to turn the unit off, we'll hold down the remote. And it clicks off. We'll hold on again. It clicks. And we are back. And it is on. So pretty quick turn on and off. So that is all the usage stuff for the RME ADI-2 DAC and all the menus. And now we will return to the white review table. Okay, now that we have gone over the features on this, I wanted to talk about the general usage experience of this DAC. So this DAC can be simple to use if you want it to, and it can be complicated to use if you don't want it to be complicated. So you can be as simple as just turning it on, plugging your headphones in, and turning the volume up and down. So let's talk about using it as an all-in-one first. So the headphone output of the RME is very capable. It pushes out about 1.2 watts, but it has some pretty high voltage, so it can drive pretty much anything. You shouldn't have too many problems driving stuff for this. There's very few headphones I've found that haven't been able to be driven decently well off of this headphone output. Now it is only 1/4 inch. There's no balanced headphone output on this. For that, you will have to step up to the ADI-2 Pro. But the headphone out on this actually sounds pretty good. I think it's around the quality level. I'd say maybe like a Magni 3, if not slightly better than that. So this is a pretty quality headphone output. It lacks a little bit in dynamics. I don't think it's the most dynamic sounding amp in the world. And I also think it's holding back the DAC a little bit. I think the DAC sounds better when fed through an external amplifier than when being fed into the internal amplifier. But this is a very respectable headphone amplifier, and this unit can absolutely be used as an all-in-one without any problems, and it sounds pretty good. I have used it for a lot, just the unit itself, and I've had no qualms with this unit, just using it as an all-in-one. The IEM output, it sounds decent. I've liked it better for some IEMs than others. The Andromeda I thought was really good out of it because it's very clean and very low output impedance. Same with the headphone out. These are both very low output impedance on both of these outputs. The IEM output, some IEMs I thought sounded a little dead. It's not the best sounding amp in the world, even though it's clean, but it just sounds, I don't know, a little bit deader to me than the full-sized headphone out. And I have noticed with certain pairs of IEMs, when I go in the IEM output and then go to the headphone output through a 1/4 inch adapter, I much prefer how the headphone output sounds. This, for some IEMs, just sounds a little bit too dead to me. But either way, both of these outputs are both very usable and both good. It's just going to depend on what headphones you have. And then for the volume knob is really nice, just clicky. And then as I showed, the screen will show your volume, and then all the settings I've already been over. So that's pretty much all for the usage here. Between here and back on the desk, you should have a pretty decent idea of how all this stuff operates. Now, let's talk about using it as just a DAC. So I know there's people that really like this DAC. I've seen people that don't like how this DAC sounds. This thing, you have to want a certain thing. So this DAC is definitely, you can definitely tell it's targeted more at pros. This is a very, let's say, a very flat, very reference type sounding DAC. It's very, I'd say, clinical sounding and kind of dry. And some people like that sound and other people don't. I think there are a lot of people out there that won't necessarily like how this sounds. They want a little more flavor and a little more color with their DAC. Like, it's not the most musical sounding DAC. This is a very analytical and very dry sounding DAC. It's kind of like how I said, like the HD800 is, very, very much so meant for analyzing music and can be, kind of brutal sounding. This is kind of like that, where you can tell this thing's job is meant to analyze music and for mixing purposes and for working with sound, where it was not really intended for listening to sound for pleasure. Now, that being said, some people like that analytical type sound, and there's a lot of people that prefer very, very accurate, very analytical sound. And for those of you, I think this DAC will be a good choice. But for those of you that like a little more fun and a little more flavor in your music, I think I would look at a couple other DACs, which I'll get into in just a second. So yeah, it is going to depend a lot on what you're going with. But all in all, the RME is a great all-in-one unit. Very usable headphone outs, very clean, very detailed DAC. DAC is great detail. Dynamics I thought were pretty decent. I don't think it's the most dynamic sounding DAC I've heard, but dynamics are certainly very good. I'm not the best at reviewing DACs, but this is just what I've noticed after using this thing for a year. I haven't really had any other expensive DACs to A/B it to. I've A/B'd it against some lower end stuff, like right now I have a S-DAC balanced and a topping D10. Definitely blows both of those out of the water. But anyway, I think this DAC's probably closest competitors right now. Let's see, we have the Socris DAC 1421 and 1541. USB Pre 2, I think, is, like I said, is a very similar type deal to this. Dangerous Music Source, I guess the Shit Gumby technically probably be a competitor to this, somewhere in the same price range. Those off the top of my head would probably be the main competitors to this DAC. But anyway, I do want to mention too, right here towards the end of this, that after a year of using this DAC, and I do like this DAC. I do recommend it. It's a very good sounding DAC, especially for people that like all the features. Like, this is another Swiss Army knife type of amp. Like I said, I called the IFI amps the Swiss Army. This is even more. This is like the big Swiss Army knives, those big fat ones. But anyway, after a little over a year of using this DAC, I am going to be moving on to another DAC. I am getting a Socris DAC 1541, and I will be using that for a little bit. There is a chance that I will come back to one of these, but I am going to be moving on to another DAC here on the channel, so you will see the Socris DAC 1541. But the RME ADI-2 is a spectacular DAC. It definitely deserves all of its praise. Amazing features, a really small little build. Like, I love how small and compact this is. Like, this can be, your all-in-one for a pretty end-game setup for, I think, a lot of people. But yeah, really nice unit. it's expensive, but great build quality, great sound, a lot of features, and I see why a lot of people like it, and it definitely should be one that's on your shopping list if you are looking for a very high-end feature-packed DAC. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of the RME ADI-2. Links of where to buy this in the description, as well as my Twitter and my contact email, and all other relevant information. But anyway, I look forward to seeing you in the next review. Bye.